Question is, how do I deal with a revise and resubmit recommendation by the editor? Ian?
Well, as a contributor, I know that I can. He wasn't really serious when he said revise, or she was not really serious when they said revise and resubmit. There are just a few typos that the reviewers picked up, and one reference I got to squeeze in here. I'm going to turn this thing around and send it back to you in about 3 weeks with a couple of those things fixed, and then you're going to accept it. Tom?
When I write to authors of manuscripts that have been recommended for revise and resubmit, I encourage them to do so. I've had the hurt of rejected manuscripts before, but I encourage them to do so and to send it back to us. And I encourage them, and I underline this, that they could add a note with their revised manuscript saying how they had met the reviewer's previous comments. And I've got to admit that that has actually been really quite helpful, because from an author's point of view, if you can, once you get over the pain of rejection, if you can then kind of write down kind of what the reviewers are saying you might improve to your manuscript, and then in one column, and then in the second column kind of address how you're done with that, it removes it from the feeling of being rejected yourself. So I've often found that really helpful. I also get to kind of sit on various kind of shirk funding application review proposals where it's often, I mean, not everything gets accepted, and it's often a good idea to kind of send notes back and saying, yes, we you know, please revise your application and send it back. And if somebody has acknowledged that I sent this proposal in before and it was turned down, but the reviewers made these comments and that's how I've addressed it, boy, does it help the second lot of reviewers kind of think through, well, here's somebody who's going to take advice, who's going to listen to advice and do something about it. And that makes me feel predisposed towards them anyway.
You know, Tom's given a wonderful answer, and I feel meaner than a junkyard dog for being sarcastic. Obviously I just had that experience. I've worked my way through the whole thing, made a decision, and then it comes back, you know, within days. Obviously they haven't had time to work at it. This is an invitation to do the kinds of things that Tom has talked about, that's the answer I wish I had given.
Well, go ahead.
I think it depends on how many manuscripts you're receiving. I mean, we receive no more than 40 a year, so I can afford to give a fairly amount of time to each one. If you're receiving 400 a year, then it's a lot different, and I might be as hard-nosed as my colleague here.
Well, I guess I'm not quite as generous as Tom. I never encourage the author to revise and resubmit, because I think to encourage them, in essence, says, well, I think it's accepted, and if you just deal with it, then it'll be accepted. So I never want to offer false hope. But what I will do is that I will comment to the author about the specific commentary that the reviewers made and say, look, you should pay particular attention to A, B, and C in reviewer 1 and P, Q, and R in reviewer 2, and so I give them some direction in terms of what I think are the important issues, which should point out to all of you sitting in here, hopefully you've picked up on it, is that editors read every manuscript that comes into their office, okay? And they have to make some pretty judicious decisions about who to send it to, whether it should be rejected, where it goes, etc. And so there's a real sense of conscientiousness of my colleagues in terms of taking on the role of the editor. In terms of your response, okay, I think that the niftiest thing that you can do when you get the letter that says, okay, revise and resubmit, is to sit down and write an email or a letter to the editor saying, thank you very much. I mean, I didn't like what you had to say, but thank you very much, and I will get back to you with a revised manuscript on such and such a date. That allows the editor to plan his or her activity, because there's journal articles coming in, going out, decisions being made. And so you can say, okay, in 4 weeks I'm going to have to do this because this paper is going to come in. And you can alert the assessors In our system, what we do is we send the resubmitted paper back to the original assessors and ask them for their second and final comment. So you get one kick at the can. If you don't bring it up to snuff on the revised and resubmission, it's done. It's toast, okay? Now, what you'll find is that some authors will write back and say, God, you chose some really stupid assessors. And these assessors didn't understand my brilliant ideas, and they don't, they're not worthy of being an assessor, and it goes on and on and on and on, okay? It serves no purpose, okay?
Don't do that.
If an assessor has said, this is not clear, the assessor is not saying, oh, let's see, how can I tweak the nose of that author by saying this is unclear? It means that the reader did not understand what it was that you had to say. And so you need to reflect on that. If it says this should be reconceptualized, don't write to the editor saying, well, the reviewer simply doesn't know his material, etc. It's saying that you need to do something. So write back to the editor saying, I will get it back to you on such and such a time. And then when you do the revisions, and I mean the revisions, don't add a word to a sentence and assume that somehow clarifies it. If the reviewer says you need to take into consideration the recent work of Ian, it doesn't mean simply to add Ian's bibliographic reference, okay? It's telling you, go look at what he had to say theoretically, methodologically, whatever it is. And how does that reflect in terms of what it is that you wrote? Now, you cannot, well, at your peril, simply dismiss the assessors, okay? It's not going to work. The assessors have done their homework. So don't try and dismiss them or argue that you don't need to address. It's at your peril, and I would say 9 out of 10 times it won't work. 1 out of 10, maybe you can argue that Ian's comments were simply inappropriate, but most of the time they're there for a good reason. And then when you submit your revised manuscript back to the author, or to the editor, it would be ideal if you, in boldface or in green ink or whatever, to say, here's the changes I made. And then an explanation to the editor in a separate covering letter to say, look, here's what I did. Assessor 1.1 was this, and I dealt with this on page 46 and page 47. Assessor 1's second commentary I dealt with, etc. In other words, give a précis to the editor of what it is that you did in terms of revising as you make your resubmission. Now, it takes a lot of time, but A, editors are grateful, B, reviewers are certainly appreciative of that kind of specific, what's the word I'm looking for, specific addressing that particular issue that they raised.
Attention.